He served as a paratrooper in the Army, worked on the Ron Paul DC staff, and is a graduate of Yale Law School, where he won the Yale Miller Prize for Best Paper on the Bill of Rights. For his paper solving the puzzle of the enemy combatant statutes. He also assisted teaching military history at Yale. A lot of people understand and know what oath keepers are. But I think the one thing that people should really remember is some of us believe that it's a possibility that we're going to have a federal government that's going to try to take away our guns or really it just put us in a complete, total police state. It's much more visible than we have today. This organization is the key organization to stopping that from happening. Because they are going to the people that our federal government and our state government are going to ask to come and take these weapons and make sure that those people remember the oath that they took. I introduce to you Stewart Rhodes.
I don't use notes when I talk, but I got some quotes here from a Supreme Court case that I want to read you. Now, when he said that some people think these things might happen, I'd like to correct that. These things have happened and are happening right now. And you can look back as recently as Hurricane Katrina for a very good example of a very obvious and gross violations of the rights of the American people under the Bill of Rights. And who here knows what I'm talking about? The gun confiscation, house-to-house searches that were done, warrantless searches and confiscation of firearms, folks being told to go to the Superdome, and then once they were there, not being allowed to leave. And we got footage in our 10 Orders video of Shepard Smith standing on the bridge saying they're not being let across this bridge to get out of the city and go to Gretna, Louisiana. They're just being stopped there at a police checkpoint. That happened. And out of that experience, woke a lot of folks, a lot of people opened their eyes for the first time. But that certainly wasn't the first example in our history of gross violations of human rights. We've seen it. Earlier speakers talked about the fugitive slave laws. Most of you probably understand the history of the internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II, correct? You had over 100,000 U.S. citizens of Japanese descent. What was their crime? Being racially Japanese. That was really it during the war with Japan. And that was done by executive order by FDR, who is the patron saint of the political left in this country. So it's really interesting. It's like our critics and our, like Southern Private Law Center, for example, they try to say we're being paranoid and that we have baseless fears, that we're spreading paranoia and propaganda on baseless fears. Are fears baseless? No. Let's look at, I want to give you just one example in our list of 10 orders. One of them is that we will not detain an American citizen as an unlawful enemy combatant or subject American citizens to military tribunals. Is that a baseless fear? No. Okay, that has been done in our history. Most recently, during the Bush administration, there were 2 American citizens so detained in military detention. One was Jose Padilla, who was captured in the Chicago O'Hare International Airport, and the second one was Yasser Hamdi, who was captured in Afghanistan. They're both U.S. citizens. Now, you might say to yourself, well, who cares? They're bad guys. They're Muslim terrorists, or they were aligned with Al-Qaeda. Does our Constitution depend upon the niceness, the goodness of the person?
No.
Or is it written for all of us? If you don't defend, I think it was H.L. Mencken that said, if you don't defend the devil, then don't be surprised when your rights are taken away. I'm paraphrasing him. But that's the whole point of the Constitution, is that you draw some hard lines, just like the ACLU defended the Nazis' rights to march through Skokie, Illinois, as contemptible and disgusting as that was, to have Holocaust survivors who lived there exposed to a bunch of freaky, American versions of what they had escaped out of Nazi Germany. Just as that was the right thing to do, because freedom of speech is such an important bedrock fundamental principle, the same goes for your right to jury trial. It was one of the causes of taking up arms in a revolution back in 1775. Listed in the Declaration of Independence in 1776, among the wrongs there was not just simply, taxation of representation. It was also denial of jury trial, being taken away over the sea to be tried in a foreign jurisdiction, foreign to their constitution. So that's what's being done now. Yes, it was only done to 2 American citizens recently, but the claim is that the government can do it to any of you. And Obama has simply taken that claim to its logical conclusion. And what is that? If he can detain an American citizen as an unlawful combatant in wartime, treating you just like you were an Iraqi or an Afghani, if he can do that to you, then he can also do what can be done to the enemy in wartime. Who out there is a combat veteran or a military veteran who knows what can be done to the enemy in wartime, besides detention? What else can be done? You can just kill them on sight. That's what soldiers do to each other in wartime. Even if the guy is only a cook or a radio operator, he's part of the military machine, right? You can just kill him on sight. That is what Obama has claimed the power to do to any American citizen now. If he or his staff or someone, one of his functionaries in the executive branch, in the CIA, in the NSA, in the DOD, any of them, if they, whoever he delegates that authority to, decides that you are an enemy belligerent in the war on terror, he claims he can just have you killed. Are you okay with that?
No!
Is that what a free republic is like?
No!
Is that what the men who fought in Lexington Green fought for?
No!
To create that? The founders knew and understood. They had seen the history of England. They knew what the Star Chamber was like in English history, where you were accused on secret evidence of being a traitor against the king, and then tortured until you confessed. They knew what that was like. And they stopped it, or they thought they did, when they wrote the Constitution and they wrote Article 3, the Treason Clause, which spells out exactly what must be done with any American. I don't care if he's a scumbag like Jose Padilla, an ex-gang member that decided to go join Al-Qaeda. It doesn't make a difference. Article 3 of the Treason Clause governs. It's the supreme law of the land. If you don't like it, get the hell out of my country. You don't belong here. If you want to live like that, go to China. Go to Cuba. Go any place else. I'm talking to all the damn neocons out there on the internet. You're going to see this later on. If you are so afraid of Al-Qaeda, so afraid of Muslim extremists, that you're willing to throw our Constitution down the toilet, then get out of my country. Here's Article 3 said. It says that treason shall be only making war against the United States or aiding and abetting its enemies. And a trial for treason requires 2 witnesses to the overt act. It should be only the overt act of doing these things. Not your voice, not criticizing your government, not criticizing the king or criticizing the president. Overt actions in support of the enemy of your country or making war against your country. That is what treason is. And it requires a jury trial in an Article 3 civilian court, and it requires 2 witnesses, extra procedural protections, because they understood that the charge of treason is the most dangerous, the most scandalous thing you can accuse anybody of. And nowadays, the only parallel to it is calling you a terrorist. Like I get called all the time by SPLC. They knew that that label applied to a person will make them so reprehensible, even the accusation, that their neighbors would support just doing away with them. Like many support right now this concept of Obama being able to kill any American citizen. Because they figure he's a bad guy. Terrorists don't deserve a trial. Terrorists don't deserve due process. They're presuming what?
Guilt.
They're presuming guilt. And what's the principle in America?
Innocent until proven guilty.
That's right. Until they're proven guilty by who?
Court.
A jury of your peers.
Okay.
Let me read you. This is a quotation out of a 1866 case. This is the first example. Sadly, this did not come out of nowhere. The idea that you could treat the American people like a foreign enemy. There are hard lines in our Constitution of what can be done to us. You have to have that. To have a free society where your government does not become the abusers of your rights, you must have those hard lines. What you can do to a foreign enemy in wartime is what, you veterans? They can be sure shot on sight, or what governs your actions, though? The laws of war, right? The international laws of war govern what you can do to a foreign enemy in wartime. That is certainly true. So this gentleman here is an E6 from the Navy. What can you do to a foreign enemy in wartime besides kill him? If you capture him, then what happens? You can detain them for the duration of the conflict, or if they've done something in violation of the laws of war, you can try them at military tribunal for violation of the laws of war, just like we did at Nuremberg when we executed the Nazis. Okay? Or we did to a lot of the Japanese officers who we captured after the war was over and tried to confer violation of the laws of war. You can do that to a foreign enemy in wartime. Where in the Constitution does it say that you can do that to your own people? It doesn't. Now some libertarians get upset about that. They're like, well, wait a minute, everyone has rights. Certainly true. But we have applied the international laws of war to foreign enemies that was recognized from the very founding of this country as being legal. And then you argue about, well, what do the laws of war allow and what is just? And certainly there are higher principles above even the laws of war. You know, Nuremberg really was in part an appeal to natural law. But in our Constitution, we do allow that separation between us and them. But there is nothing whatsoever in there that says anything about applying the international laws of war here domestically, bringing those international laws of war home. Plenty of conservatives get very upset and angry if you talk about, you know, Supreme Court justices using international law, right? They're like, oh, it's ridiculous. Why would you want to cite international law in a Supreme Court opinion? They get very upset about that for very good reason. But then they want to take the international laws of war, and in the name of fighting the war on terror, they want to bring those home. And they want to lay it over the top of our Bill of Rights and wipe our Bill of Rights out in order to get bad guys who are U.S. citizens. This is precisely the road that every country has gone down that has turned into a totalitarian state. Germany did the same thing. They had a normal track for normal criminals, and then they had a special track, a second track for political enemies of the state. That's what happened in Germany. And so you went before a Nazi judge, handpicked by the Nazis, in a kangaroo court, much like the Star Chamber in English history. But like I said a minute ago, this idea of bringing the laws of war home and applying them to the American people did not start under the Bush administration. It started first under the Lincoln administration. In the war against the South had seceded and became its own separate country. They treated each other like foreign nations. They had parley and they had ceasefires, they exchanged prisoners. In a lot of ways, they obeyed the laws of war. But Lincoln didn't just treat the Southerners like enemies. He also treated Northern American citizens of North America, or the North, like enemies in wartime. And he detained 15,000 of them in military detention, oftentimes because they were criticizing him and his administration. He would detain newspaper editors. And he also tried about 5,000 of them by military tribunal. Some of those were put to death. One man named Milligan was accused of conspiring to set free Southern slaves held in Illinois. So he was in Illinois. Illinois is part of the North, right? Not part of the breakaway South. But he was accused of doing this, and so they detained him by military detention, charged him by military tribunal, and found him guilty, and scheduled him for execution. Well, his appeal went to the Supreme Court after Lincoln had died, after the war was over, after Lincoln had assassinated. So, lucky for him, it wasn't during wartime. So in a moment of clarity, after the storm had passed, after the war was over, the Supreme Court did the right thing. And here's what happened in that case. The lawyers for the government, they argued this. They said, of the Bill of Rights, because the defense of Milligan was, hey, I need a trial. Article 3 of the Treason Clause requires a trial and a jury before you can execute me. You can't just execute me without a jury trial. And the government lawyers said of the Bill of Rights, these in truth are all peace provisions of the Constitution, and like all other conventional and legislative laws and enactments, are silent amidst arms. And when the safety of the people becomes supreme law, by the Constitution, as originally adopted, no limitations are put upon the war-making and war-conducting powers of Congress and the President, is what they claimed. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
That's very much the same claim that came out of the Bush administration after 9/11. That the president as commander-in-chief has plenary power to wage war as he sees fit to save the nation, and nothing can stop him. When they were using NSA spying on American citizens, their defense was, well, this is war. The president has the authority to surveil the battlefield. That's what two Bush lawyers wrote in the New York Times. He has the authority to surveil the battlefield, and America is also part of the battlefield in the war on terror, was their claim. So their claim is that when it comes to the war-making powers, the laws of war govern, not the Bill of Rights, when it comes to you here in the United States. Now here was the response of the Supreme Court in 1866 against this claim that the Bill of Rights are peacetime provisions only. They said, even these provisions, expressed in such plain English words that it would seem the ingenuity of man could not evade them, are now, after the lapse of more than 70 years, sought to be avoided. Those great and good men who wrote the Constitution foresaw that troublous times would arise when rulers and people would become restive and under restraint and seek by sharp and decisive measures to accomplish ends deemed just and proper. And that is the principles of constitutional liberty, and the Constitution, and they understood that the principles of constitutional liberty would be in peril unless established by irreparable law. The history of the world had taught them that what was done in the past might be attempted in the future. And then they said, the Constitution of the United States is the law for rulers and people, equally in war and in peace, and covers with its shield the protection for all classes of men at all times and in all circumstances. No doctrine involving more pernicious consequences was ever invented by the wit of man than that any of the provisions can be suspended during any of the great agencies of government. So in other words, they said, look, I don't care if it's an emergency. It doesn't make a difference. That's what the Bill of Rights is for, actually. It's for emergencies. It's to keep you from doing something you wouldn't do when you're not afraid. It's when you're afraid, when you're scared out of your mind, when you're angry and mad, like we were post 9/11, that's when you tend to throw the Bill of Rights out the window. And the totalitarians on both the left and the right understand that in this country. They know it's when they can get their stuff passed. They can pass the Patriot Act, or the Intercombatant, or the Military Tribunals Act. They know that these are the times when they can get away with things they've always wanted. And that's what they do. So fast forward to 1942. The Supreme Court had put the genie back in the bottle. But then, during World War II, you had 8 German saboteurs come ashore off the eastern coast. And they came ashore to blow up factories. One of them claimed U.S. citizenship. They were all captured. One of them turned himself in and turned the other ones in. And one of them was a U.S. citizen. He lived in the United States and grew up here. They could have easily, they had a statute in place back then that said that if you served in a foreign military during a time of war, an enemy nation, during a time of declared war, then that's an automatic renunciation of your citizenship. They could have used that, but they didn't. This is the same court that gave FDR everything else he wanted, same New Deal court. They ruled very broadly and said, not that this particular person, by joining the German army in a declared war, we had declared war on Germany, they didn't say, this guy to announce his citizenship. They could have done that. Narrow focus on the case in front of them. Instead, they ruled very broadly and said, citizenship's irrelevant. What counts is what law you are accused of breaking. He's not being accused of breaking some domestic law against, arson or sabotage. He's being accused of breaking the laws of war. And so, under the laws of war, you get a military trial, was their reasoning. In other words, they threw the Milligan decision out the window. Milligan, the court ruled that we don't care what he's accused of. He's an American citizen. He's not part of the military. He's not under military law by being part of the military. He's not a foreign enemy in the South. They ruled that, hey, he's a civilian, and he needs this trial in a civilian court. But in Ex parte Quare in 1942, they reversed that and said, what counts is what law you're accused of breaking. And so if you're accused of breaking international law, it will be the International Military Tribunal rules that will apply to you. That's what they said in 1942. The court gave FDR whatever he wanted, very broad power to do as he deemed necessary. What else was going on in 1942? The internment of Japanese Americans. Same thing. They were being treated like foreign enemies. They were being detained en masse the same way as you would do, potentially, with an occupied foreign nation in wartime. That's how they were being treated. Now, that precedent of detaining that one German saboteur who was a citizen under military detention and trial, that wasn't used again until post 9/11. But that is what the Bush administration cited as their authority. But they took a principle, it's wrong already on its face, it violates the treason clause, but they took that already egregious violation of the Bill of Rights and they expanded it into a war that is not a declared war against a distinct enemy you can identify, but is a war against a tactic. Terrorism is a tactic. We don't have a war against Al-Qaeda. It's a war on terror, right? And so they took this idea of detaining American citizens and trying them by tribunal, and they expanded it to a war on a tactic. And so now it's gone even far beyond anything Lincoln did, even far beyond anything FDR did. Now it's wide open. First Bush and then Obama claim the authority on their own say-so, on secret evidence, to declare any of you to be an unlawful combatant in the war on terror. And how do you know you're not? Because you say you're not? Well, of course you say you're not. Everyone's guilty says they're not guilty. So, what's going to decide whether you're guilty or innocent? If you're lucky enough to get a military tribunal, then some hand-picked military judge, hand-picked by the president probably, will decide your fate. But you might not even get to trial. You could just have a Hellfire missile dropped on you out of the sky by a Predator drone. Now you might say to yourself, well, come on, Stewart, how's that? That's not going to happen. It's only happened to that one guy over in Yemen. He got what he deserved. Where is the legal principle that says it can't be done to you?
That's right.
There is no legal separation between you and him. You say, oh, wait a minute. I'm here in the United States. He was way overseas somewhere. Do you think location matters? Do you think geography is going to be a legal principle you can stand on? The case they're relying on is 1942 Ex parte Clarence, a guy captured here. That's the case they're relying on. Jose Padilla was captured here. The Fourth Circuit upheld that and said that the judicial branch doesn't even have any business whatsoever even reviewing the case. It's totally up to the president to decide what to do with that guy. That's what the Fourth Circuit said. The U.S. Supreme Court in the Hamdi case, H-A-M-D-I, I recommend you read it. They said nothing in the U.S. Constitution prevents the U.S. government from detaining one of its own citizens as an unlawful combatant. They didn't have to reach the question of what you do with an American citizen captured here because Hamdi happened to be captured in Afghanistan. But there's that precedent, the one they're relying on is Clarence, captured in the United States. So do you see why I worry about the future? I'm not being paranoid. I'm just connecting the dots. It shouldn't be that your only safety relies in, well, they won't do that. I'm sure there's plenty of Jews in 1936 or 1935 who thought, well, they just won't do that. It's not going to be that bad. Under the law, in the constitutional law, you don't rely on political checks on what your government can do to you. You rely on hard, fast, bright-line rules in the Constitution that say, lay an absolute line in the sand. Like the First Amendment, for example. I don't care what your speech is, it's protected. Unless you're being libelous, you're telling a lie about somebody that hurts their reputation. That's the only exception they carved out. So, if you don't have a bright line rule, if you don't protect even, like with free speech, if you don't protect even abhorrent speech. Like, I don't agree with a lot of the things I hear coming out of the Occupy Wall Street movement. Does it make it okay to go and spray some girl in the face with pepper spray? No, it does not. It's wrong. It doesn't make a difference. Same thing here. I don't care. What was the guy's name? Al-Awlaki? I could care less about him. But I do care about my Constitution. And so that's why it was wrong for Obama to have an American citizen assassinated. Because it will be done here at home. Mark my words. If you let it be done to a U.S. citizen anywhere in the world, I don't care how disgusting that person is, it will be done to you. And right now, What is DHS right now telling you what it thinks of you? We just heard the other day, I heard from my checker president in Tennessee about DHS, 2 DHS agents going to a Mormon cannery and asking them, demanding their customer list. Why would they want to know who is storing powdered milk and wheat? Do you think a suicide bomber is going to store powdered milk? Who do they think is the enemy? There's no, about a month ago, we discovered that there were some surplus stores being visited by double agents, by FBI agents, who wanted the surplus stores to start spying on their customers, who bought MREs, who bought high-capacity magazines, who bought bipods for their rifles, who bought night flashlights, whatever that would be, I guess infrared. So they're already telling you, they've already been telling us that they'll be going to gun dealers and pawn shops, same thing. If someone buys bulk ammo, they want to know who that is. So they're already kind of telling you what they think of you and who they think the real enemy is, where their focus is. But the Mormon canners are crying out loud. They're not selling guns, they're not selling ammunition, they're not selling magazines for rifles. They're selling food. You know? Fruit punch mix for the kids. Freeze-dried carrots and apple chips. But they want to know who those people are, because the Mormon cannery don't just sell only to Mormons, they sell it to the general population too. They want to know who you are who's storing food. Now why? What rational reason could they give? What legitimate reason could there be for wanting to know who is storing food? Can you think of anything? No. How's it public safety? What, are you a danger? Your powdered milk's a danger to the public? They want to know who's storing food because either they want to know where the food is, they can come get it when the time comes, or they want to know who the switched on, aware, and prepared Americans are. Now, why would they want to know that? Because they see you as the enemy, as the future enemy for their plans. The same reason why they consider all returning veterans potential enemies. The same reason why they consider all gun owners. Anybody who would have the temerity to carry openly in the public. Anybody who wants to speak out about the Constitution. Anybody who's a Ron Paul supporter or a Chuck Baldwin supporter. Those are who they perceive as the enemy. And I can only deduce that the plans they have for us, their future military opponents, are such that they expect us to resist. And when we resist, not if, but when, they want to be able to come get your food, because without food in your belly, you cannot fight. They understand that. Stalin starved out the farmers who resisted his pogroms. That was his weapon of war. He confiscated all their crops and left them starving. Pol Pot did the same thing to the people in Cambodia. All across the world, the totalitarian governments have used food, denial of food as a weapon. This is one example, guys. I'll give you a whole bunch more. They're telling you who they consider to be the enemy. It's not al-Awlaki and Al-Qaeda or guys with turbans on their heads. It's you. Anybody who stands for the Constitution and takes it seriously, is willing to fight for it, they perceive as their future enemies. And they will bring the laws of war home. So how does it relate to nullification? Well, the whole point is to wake up enough of our military and police so that they will refuse to do it. I don't care what their plans are. It doesn't make a difference how minute, how well figured out their plans are, how many lists they compile. If the guys with the guns don't do it, it can't be done. It just won't be done. And so what's the model we should hope for? I mean, don't kid yourself about where we are, okay, and what's coming. But the model we should hope for, the ideal would be what happened in East Germany in 1989, where you had the mass uprising against communism. The East Germans had finally had enough. They came to a tipping point where the vast majority of the population was sick of living under communism. They wanted to be free like they saw in the West right there next to them. They could see the TV stations, they could hear the radio stations coming from West Germany. They knew what it was like over there. And the government lost legitimacy in the eyes of the people. It reached such a tipping point that about 80 or 90% of the people in East Germany didn't want to live under communism anymore. And they went out in the streets and did mass protests. Well, after a certain point, the Communist Party, in desperation, ordered the military to go and crush and suppress the protesters, even though they're peaceful protesters, go suppress them like they'd done back in Prague Spring in the 60s. Now, in 1989, things had changed. Not only had there been a tipping point reached in the general population, but also within the military, because it came from the people. They also didn't want to live in a communism anymore. And so when the order came to crush the rebellion, to crush the protesters, this peaceful rebellion, the commander of the army refused. He said, nope, no one's going to leave the base. We're going to stay on base. You're on your own, Communist Party. And what do you think happened after that? 2 days later, the wall was gone. It fell 2 days later. And all the Stasi, all the secret police, who everyone had been so afraid of, were now running and hiding in terror themselves. Tearing off their insignia, hiding their uniform, trying to pretend like they're just normal soldiers, normal cops, because they knew the gig was up. Without the support of the military, they could not do it. It could not be done. We saw the same thing happen in Tunisia, in Egypt. What the military does or does not do makes a huge difference. And so, if such a day comes in this country, when orders like that do come down from above to crush and suppress the American people, if our military does what's right, if they simply keep their oath to the Constitution, they will stand down and refuse. And they will be like East Germany when the fall of the wall came in 1989. That's the epic deal. That is possible if we reach enough of them. If we don't reach enough of them, then I don't know what's going to happen in this country. I worry about it a great deal. And one possibility, how much time do I have left? None. Okay, sorry. One possibility you got to guard against, though, is a military coup. That's also unconstitutional. I ran out of time, I can't talk about that, but it's a serious threat. No easier way to trick you into giving up the Constitution and make you so afraid of the Marxists on the political left that you're willing to jump into the arms of a bunch of neocon generals on the political right. Watch out for that. That temptation is coming. Thank you.